Good evening. My name is Manina Jones, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of English and Writing Studies in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Western University. And it is a tremendous pleasure to welcome you to this evening's conversation with Ivan Coyote and Zalika Reid-Benta. It's also a privilege to participate in Words, a one-of-a-kind literary festival of creative ideas, artistic expression, and cultural diversity. Based in London, Ontario, Words brings people together from across the country and around the world to celebrate the power of words to inspire, inform, move, and make us think. In short, to open our minds and hearts to the stories of others. With that in mind, and before we begin our conversation, I wanted to pause to acknowledge that today we lost a powerfully influential teacher, activist, poet, author, and mentor, Lee Maracle, a member of the Stolo Nation, and we dedicate this evening's conversation and reading to her. In Western's Guide to Land Acknowledgements, those who are tasked to give them are encouraged to reflect on how the land acknowledgement might go beyond rote recitations and seek to inspire action and commitment towards reconciliation and building relationships with Indigenous communities. Lee Maracle once said that land acknowledgements recognize the presence of Indigenous ancestors, and she joins those ancestors today. They're here, she observed. The land is there. It's alive, and it's around you. You might as well say hello. So let me ask you to pause and say hello, and think about whatever place you find yourself in today, and both its storied past and your own part in activating the potential of its future. I acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and people whose names we don't yet know or struggle to articulate, but whose stories it is our duty and our honor to hear. I would like to throw things over this evening as quickly as possible to our accomplished writers. But before I do so, I will introduce them both. They'll each give a reading from a selection of their work, and then we'll open it up to a further conversation, and you can post questions in the Q&A. I'll start with Ivan, since Ivan's going first. Ivan Coyote, I'm very proud to say, is the Alice Munro Chair in Creativity at Western University and has also served as a writer-in-residence. Born and raised in Whitehorse, Yukon, they are the author of, take a breath, 12 books, the creator of 4 films, 6 stage shows, and 3 albums that combine storytelling with music. In 2020, Ivan was awarded the Freedom to Read Award by the Writers' Union of Canada in recognition of work that is passionately supportive of the freedom to read and free expression. Ivan's book have won prizes and recognitions too numerous to list here. In 2017, though, I will mention that Ivan was given an honorary Doctor of Laws from Simon Fraser University for their writing and activism. Perhaps most impressive, Ivan has toured public schools around the world for nearly 20 years, using the power of a personal story to fight bullying and to make schools safer. When the pandemic hit, Ivan's peripatetic ways were put on hold, and they turned their attention to composing long-deferred letters to friends, family, and strangers. The result is a deeply moving bestseller, Care of Letters, Connections, and Cures, which has been nominated for a Governor General's Award, and from which Ivan will read this evening. Ivan, may I hand things over to you?
Thanks, Manina. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Like Manina, I'd like to start off by acknowledging that I'm residing currently and working on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Ottawandaron, and the Lenape peoples. And I'd also like to dedicate my reading tonight to Lee Miracle, who was a friend of mine and a sometimes mentor and always role model, and someone who I hold deep and abiding respect for many years now. I first met Lee at my first Writers Festival when my first solo book came out in 2020. And I'm going to read from Care Of tonight. And I'm going to start off, like Manina said, it's a collection of letters, and I'm going to start off with a letter that I received on June 9th, 2017. Dear Ivan, I attended your session at the Research and Statistics Conference today in Terrace, and after hearing from you, I was feeling quite vulnerable, on the cusp of crying if I tried to express to you then all the things I wanted to say, which now seems ironic and shows me just how much work I still have to do on myself. When you had mentioned the way in which emotion is considered a feminine thing and therefore a weak thing, and while my peers nodded, I could only worry that in reality, they may not be so understanding. I'm a cisgender female, mostly closeted bisexual, and I was raised in a conservative Christian home and school, so when I heard a Mormon colleague strike up a conversation about religion, I eavesdropped, and I loved your response to her, never dismissing her faith, but dismissing the way it had been perverted. From love and inclusion to hate and exclusion, from a recognition of the beauty of the human spirit and body in all forms reflecting the ungendered God, to this small, limited acceptance of some forms. I realize now that my upbringing has stripped me of the confidence to do the things that interest me, or to not even consider some things as an option for myself. My father's words and the church's rules truly did set me upon a specific path. As a research analyst at my institution, this distrust in my own abilities as a queer woman meant I didn't even apply for this job in the first place until the male manager recruited me specifically. For the first 2 years, I didn't believe I had the math or logic skills, as that is a man's brain, I was told, and the school I had grown up in left me with a grade 8 level math, and I never attempted a math course in college. It was 2 years before I even trusted I could count, 3 before I felt like I understood just what I was counting. I'm coming up on my 4th anniversary in the job, and I've finally taken a first-year university-level stats course, which I aced. I'm also enrolled in a database administration program, a male-dominated profession, and finding success, but more than that, finding that I've been doing that work all along, but without those labels that have intimidated me in the past that were not for me. Hearing someone acknowledge something so simple as you have been discouraged from discovering your full potential, and that wasn't right. In a conference where I felt uneducated compared to all my peers, unable to contribute to discussions because I don't trust my own judgment, to have someone send the message that you are capable of more than what everyone else has been telling you really just sewed up this little patch of my teenage ragged heart that has just barely hung in there throughout the years. I wanted to say thank you in person, but I don't think I could have gotten any other words out. So thank you for providing those words, that widening of options beyond gender, and empathy for and non-dismissal of faith, and the immediate acceptance that being queer, feminist, and faithful is not an oxymoron. From teenage me to adult me, I cannot express just how healing and hopeful that makes me. Prayers to you on your journey home, Melinda. So she wrote me in June of 2017, and I finally wrote her back in July of 2020, deep in that first pandemic summer. Dear Melinda, thank you for your beautiful letter. And before I begin to do it any justice at all, please let me start with apologizing to you that it took me 3 years, 1 month, and so far 10 days to answer you. If it makes any difference, your email has sat in a starred folder in my inbox all of these years because the moment I first read it, I knew it was one of those letters. Yeah. The ones that I really had to sit down and search inside of me to respond to properly. I remember the day we met very well. I remember you. You were sitting at one of the large round tables on my left near the back of that beautiful longhouse at the university in Terrace, close to the fold-out tables at the back that held all the coffee urns and the croissants and the muffins. I do recall, while I was preparing my storytelling sessions for that day, wondering just why I have been invited to speak to a room full of statisticians and mathematicians, and why they cared at all to listen to a transgender writer tell stories anyways. But then I met you all, told some stories, you listened, you laughed, you cried, I listened to your questions, we talked, and the sense of it all started to take shape in my head. I remember that question from that evangelical Christian woman. I've had to learn, over the years to tactfully field questions aimed at me from evangelicals of all stripes. And it is true what I said to her that day. I don't remember my exact words now, but I know in my heart what I believe, and I know what it was that I had been asked to come there and do. And I have grown to consider these moments as divine opportunities for me to do what I think of as something close to sacred work. When a person who has been taught, like I knew immediately that she had been taught, to hate and revile people like me, when they stand up to ask me a question, I must reach across that room and find my way past fear and dogma and doctrine and into the good part of her heart. But to locate that part of her heart, I must make myself truly believe that it exists, even if her body language or words are screaming otherwise, or I might miss it in the dark and the confusion, and the whole room is watching us. I must not stomp on her beliefs. I must instead step softly around them and try to speak to the tender insides of most of us that want to choose love and connection and acceptance. I am tasked with making her believe, even for just a second, that her God would never make her choose between her faith and the humanity and rights of any of his creations to peacefully coexist. It is not important to me in those few seconds that everyone in the room agrees with me, but it is vital that they witness her allowing her heart to stretch open enough to make even the possibility of room for people like me. To do this, I have to make the tiny, terrified teenager that still lives inside of me believe that nobody's God hates me ever, and that it is really only humans that are capable of twisting faith into bigotry like this. There are days, though, when I am simply not capable of making myself believe that I can find the good parts in the hearts of some humans or their gods. When it comes to using faith as a shield to hide your hate or excuse your bigotry or give yourself a reason to kill, well, I cannot think of a greater sin. I confess I cannot imagine believing in any God that would condone refusing another soul something as simple as shelter or medical care or an education for any reason. I speak to a lot of teachers and teacher candidates, school staff, administrators as part of that work that I do in schools, and I do this to quiet the murmurings of my own high school hallway ghost, to sing a lullaby a little louder than my own change room inspired nightmares and school bus flashbacks. I tell a little story about the time I ended up being housed in the men's dormitory at a university in Saskatoon during the same weekend that an evangelical Christian basketball tournament was happening on the very same campus. I joke about imagining pre-op, pre-top surgery me showering naked in a giant tiled room full of evangelical Christian farm boys from rural Saskatchewan, and I do this to illustrate how hard it can be for trans and non-binary people to access things like public schools and places, and I almost always get a letter afterward. Usually from an evangelical Christian gym teacher, often from Saskatchewan, as it turns out, who takes issue with me drawing any kind of attention to the adversarial relationship between his faith and my people. I muster up all of the patience and respect that I am able to, and then I ask him who he feels is most responsible for the well-known conflict between his religion and trans people. I ask him what he is doing right now to reconcile this relationship. I ask him if he's ever reached out to any of his fellow parishioners to support them when their church is telling them they must choose between loving their God and loving their own children. I always wonder about the queer kids in his gym class. I worry for the trans kids he is teaching. I think about the girls' volleyball team he coaches and the messages he is leaking into their hearts about who they are and what they are capable of and how they should feel about their bodies. And I question and question again why I feel I must always be so careful not to step on his faith when I am invited to places and specifically asked to speak to and undo the harm his beliefs are capable of doing to every kid he wields his words over, his rules over. At night in the dark when I cannot sleep, I hope and pray to my own gods, my own saints, that he doesn't have a queer son at home, that he will never have a trans daughter. And then I promise myself again that I will be there for all of his queer children, that I will show up for all of his trans family should they ever come to me asking for the love and acceptance that he was unable or unwilling to give them. I will be their cool uncle, the aunt that always just listens without interrupting. I will be their brother who picks them up to drive them to a safer place, their sister who saves their supper in a Tupperware in the fridge for them and lets them do a couple of loads of laundry while they sleep on the couch. I have reread and reread your letter, Melinda. I keep stopping to breathe at the bit where you write about the many years you believed that your girl's brain was not capable of doing math, how that belief has wormed its way into your head and still nibbles away in there. To this day. Did you come to the evening gig that same night in Terrace in the same longhouse? Do you remember that big gigantic logger dude that stood up that night and confessed to the whole room that he wrote poetry and that the pressure to always be a tough guy had hurt him deeply his whole life, had even harmed his relationship with his own son? He took off his sweat-stained caterpillar ball cap and held it in both hands in front of his chest as he spoke, and then he apologized for the tears that he could not force to stop from falling. I was reminded again for the millionth time how much I believe that we need to dismantle our gender box prisons and free men like him too, that he has suffered every bit as much as the little boy who always wanted to play the flute and wear tiaras, and the little girl who grew up believing that she could not do math. If there is one wrong thing in this world that I could undo right now, it would be to drain away all the shame that we have been taught to feel whenever we cry. It is not as simple as teaching ourselves to not see crying as weak or as feminine. I don't want to teach that crying is a show of strength either. I want us to see tears as a simple byproduct of thinking or feeling or listening or speaking to the world around us. I want us to see crying as being inextricably linked to living, like exhaling is to the act of breathing. I think one of the most valuable things this culture steals from our men is their tears. I'm so grateful that you were in that room in Terrace that day, Melinda, and that you found things in the stories I told that morning that I didn't even realize were hidden there in my words. I'm glad that you have found a place to keep your faith and your feminism and your queerness all safe and tucked, intact, and together inside of you. I take heart in that fact. I really do. And thank you for reminding me again of how powerful a story can be and how much of that power is found inside of the person who is listening. And that power to transform is not only held or handled by the heart of the one who is doing the telling. If this world should ever heal itself enough again that we are able to gather in large groups one day, and if I'm ever lucky enough to be asked to tell stories in a crowded room, when and if anyone stands up after and asks me a question about that crossroads where their faith and my existence seems to collide, I will think of you and I will remember your letter and I will try to find enough room in my heart to keep my faith in all of us with much love and respect. Ivan, thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Our next speaker, I'm so pleased to be able to introduce Zalika Reid-Benta. Based in Toronto, Zalika Reid-Benta is the current writer in residence at Western University. She recently received a Canada Council for the Arts grant to support her writing on a new novel project during her residency. Zalika received an MFA in fiction from Columbia University. She was a John Gardner Fiction Fellow at the Breadloaf Writers Conference and is an alumnus of the Banff Center Writing Studio. Zalika's nuanced and insightful 2019 debut story collection, Frying Plantain, won the Danuta Gleed Literary Award and the Rakuten Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for Literary Fiction. It was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and shortlisted for the Toronto Book Award, the White Pine Award, and the Trillium Book Award. In a series of short stories reminiscent of Alice Munro's Lives of Girls and Women, Zalika immerses readers in the family, school, and neighborhood life of Cara Davis, a young woman growing up and into herself in Toronto. The stories are funny, sometimes wrenching, always perceptive, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Zalika read from that collection tonight.
Thank you so much. And I'm just so privileged to be here. And it's really kind of amazing to just go after Ivan. That was such a powerful reading. So I just feel super lucky to be here. And I unfortunately didn't have the pleasure of meeting Lee Miracle, but we were talking about the different stories, and I've heard a lot about Lee. So yeah, it's definitely weighing on me today. I've decided to read from a story I don't read very often, and it's called Lovely. And I think I'm just gonna get right into it. The boyfriend and I don't see each other much, but when we do meet up, it's at the theater. Rochelle and Anita work concession, and I always tell my mother they're treating me to a free movie after work, but it's been a while since I've gone to the Silver City during one of their shifts. The plan never changes. I slip into the theater 15 minutes before the boyfriend does, and he finds me just before the lights go out, carrying a large bag of popcorn in one hand and a jumbo-sized Coke in the other. He used to grin and wave me away whenever I tried to hand him some cash for the snacks. But when he got home, he discovered a crinkled $5 bill tucked into the back of his shirt, some change in his back pocket. Now he accepts the money without any fuss, but will find a way to give it back to me later, dropping the bills on the floor the next time we meet, so I have no choice but to pick them up before someone else does. I like the theater, the comfort of the darkness and the intimacy of sitting next to the boyfriend, my hand on top of the armrest, his hand on top of mine, both of us facing the screen in front of us. Halfway through the movie, I always catch him staring at me with those kind of slick eyes. Anita calls them or nah eyes. And sometimes I let him kiss me, but pull away when he starts palming my shirt. Sometimes I eat my popcorn and act like I don't see him. When we spoke last, the boyfriend said he wanted to do something other than see a movie. Girl, I just want to look at you, face to face. Let's go somewhere. It was 3:20 on a Wednesday. He was waiting at the bus stop outside of his school, and I was walking to the subway from mine. Sorry, if you hear my cat, it's because he's very jealous and he doesn't like when I'm on Zoom or the phone or anything like that. Our commute home is the only time I can talk to him and not just message him with the phone behind my back or halfway out of my pocket. Love, come on, he said. The first few times he called me that, love, I asked him why. It's not like he's British or anything. When he typed, because you're lovely, I rolled my eyes but didn't tell him to stop. He whined for a few more minutes before I agreed to have our next date somewhere else, and my knees trembled. My entire body felt like it would buckle, and that was what I just did, buckle to his will. We're sitting in the Burger King across the street from the Eaton Center now. The boyfriend gets a lot of attention. Girls standing in line glance back at us, bold yet embarrassed, daring him to catch their gazes but blushing at the possibility he might. He eats a bacon cheeseburger with a boyish grin. Even the ketchup in the corner of his mouth is kind of charming. He's not from Toronto. He's a Brampton boy, a suburb kid. And for this date, he'd asked me to show him places his high school field trips left out. But those places are all I really know. My mother only recently moved us downtown after graduate housing accepted her application. Before that, I'd just gone to high school in the city, 5 subway stops away from the downtown core, and I'd always stayed within the school's 10-block radius until it was time to ride the northbound bus home. I've taken the boyfriend to the different neighborhoods my grade 9 geography class explored when Monsieur Wyatt made us do a scavenger hunt around the city. We stopped here because the boyfriend needed to refuel, and he wanted to sit by the window so he could see out to the crowds, to the Mormons handing out pamphlets and the shirtless Santa Claus drumming on upside-down buckets. His determination to be dazzled by his surroundings amuses me and irritates me at the same time. The way he acts as if a Burger King isn't pretty much the same no matter its location makes my eyes narrow, and I cross my arms over my chest, a deep groan pushing against my throat. You okay? You want me to get you something? He's 16, 1 year younger than me, and still asks those kinds of questions. I'm fine, I tell him. You don't have to keep asking. I decide to end his tour with ice cream at the harborfront 45 minutes later. It feels like it's some kind of summer tradition in the city, the kind of thing he'll enjoy. When he messages me afterwards to ask when we can see each other again, my mother is right next to me. I left my braids in too long. They've become matted and frizzed. My natural hair knotted at the roots, and my mother is helping me comb out the tangles. My phone vibrates, but I don't answer. My mother doesn't stop unraveling the braid she's been working on. She doesn't even look at me. Who's that? She asks. A friend. She doesn't respond right away, and when she speaks, her voice is measured. Hair's never stopped you from talking to Rochelle or Jordan. I take a minute. I can always tell her me and Rochelle are fighting, which means I'm fighting with all of the girls in our group. It's not a total lie. Even when we just moved 20 minutes away to North York, I could only see the friends I had on Marley Avenue on weekends. Now that we moved to a studio downtown, I see them even less. But we still do talk. If I tell my mother I'm in an argument with them, she'll ask for details. I'll have to pretend to be sad or angry, keep my facts straight in my head. I'm rusty with active fibbing. I've graduated to simply keeping secrets. Still, no matter what, not saying anything feels easier than telling the truth. Hannah and Justin, 2 people I hang out with in drama class, don't understand my secrecy at all. Kara, you're 17. At 17, you can drive, said Justin. You can move out of your mother's house. You can bartend. That's 19, Hannah said. Actually, you can bartend at 18, but the legal drinking age is 19, I said. Miss Jansen went over that in class. Whatever, Justin threw his hands in the air. The point is, Kara, you're an adult. You're allowed to have a boyfriend. I focus now on a knot at the end of my hair. It's my boyfriend. Maybe if I say it casually, like I expect her to be calm and not respond with homicidal rage. No, it won't work. That nonchalance is too Canadian, too much like the kids I go to school with, too white. It's a new friend, I say, Rochelle's cousin. That much is true. It's best to tell as much as the truth as I can. A cousin who's a boy. It's not a question. He was at Rochelle's birthday party a few months ago. My mother picks up the comb and slices its tooth through my braid to uncoil it. What did you two talk about? Movies? She combs through a knot, pulling apart the strands so that I gasp. You've seen him since? She asks. He lives in Brampton. He told me once he didn't always have to be the one to come down to where I lived, that I could visit him too, take the Go bus. We'd be at his house and I wouldn't spend so much time scanning streets and restaurants in fear of seeing someone who my mother knew. I don't know if I'm too scared to take up that offer or if I don't think the risk is worth it. So you don't see him then, says my mother. We usually just message each other, I say. My mother doesn't say anything, and I'm quick to fill the silence with my own voice. So remember that I have work tomorrow. I have morning shifts on Saturdays. I'll drive you. It's okay, I say carefully. I can get there myself. Work is at the HMV in Yorkdale Mall. I applied to be a stock associate, but they made me a cashier instead. When we moved downtown, management offered to transfer me to their Eaton Center location, but I enjoyed the commute, enjoyed the time I had to myself on the train, and I just told my mother there were no openings in the stores closer to us. I'm quick at scanning and bagging, but I never badger the customers to take surveys, so I'm the first shift to be cut during a slow Saturday morning. It's 11:30, and it'll take me half an hour to get back downtown, but there's no need to hurry home yet. My time is accounted for, and my mother won't call me for another 5 hours. I have the freedom of a full day. The boyfriend lives an hour and a half away from the city. Calling him down here seems like a waste of time since he'd only spend about an hour together. I take out my phone to look at my contacts. I could reach out to Hannah and Justin. Both of them can leave their houses easily, but I never talk to them outside of school. We aren't weekend kind of friends. I'm not too far away from the old neighborhood. I can call Rochelle or Jordan, who will text Anita and Ashani, and we can all go to Randy's for some patties or stop at the wing machine for a pound of buffalo wings, but only if they answer their phones. I default to the food court. It's not noon yet, so I can find a seat in the center beneath the dome ceiling pretty quickly. 5 bites into my pizza, I hear them. Natasha and Lisa, 2 girls who were hired with me from the group interview. I can see them out of the corner of my eye, only about 2 tables down from me. Lisa's purple braids clashing against her red shirt, Natasha's big gold hoop earrings tugging on her earlobes. Maybe we should ask her to sit with us, Natasha is saying. Why? It's not like she says anything more than hi to us anyway. Maybe she's just quiet, or maybe she's stush, thinks she's too good to talk to us. Why you gotta be so loud? She'll hear you. So? You realize we know nothing about her, right? It's been 6 months since we started working, and we don't even know what school she goes to? My pizza is only half finished, but I put the slice back into the paper bag and get up from my table, shouldering my green crossbody bag. See, she heard you, Natasha whispered furiously. Your mouth's too loud. I not care. I don't trust people who are that quiet. They're the ones who snap and shoot people up. If that's true, I say loudly, picking up in my used napkins, wouldn't the best course of action be to be nice to me so you don't become a target? It's the most I've ever said to them. I probably should have just ignored Lisa. She's like Anita, always has to be the loudest one in the room, and left quietly to eat my pizza on the train while I thought of something to do other than go back to the apartment. But I wanted to stun them into silence, let them see a side of me I wanted them to see. On my way back to the escalator, I can hear Lisa shouting, see, she's a fucking psycho. One time the boyfriend told me he didn't really know me. Each time we see a movie, we stay in the theater even after the credits finish rolling, cushioned in our seats until the cleanup crew kicks us out. That night, they didn't come for a while, so we were able to stay longer than usual. And the boyfriend reached over the armrest to choke a strand of hair away from my face. We can go somewhere after this, he said. Tell your mom the subway's down or something. Give us more time. Go somewhere and do what? Talk, whatever. I raised my eyebrows. I thought boys didn't like girls who talk too much. The boyfriend laughed. You don't talk at all, love. Not about, I don't know, real things. That's specific. Don't do that, he said. When I opened my mouth, he shook his head. And don't pretend like you don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you mean by real things. Be specific. He shrugged his shoulders and scratched the little stubble he had on his chin. School, parent stuff, I don't know, things, the things I tell you. I held up my index finger. 1, school's hard. Then my middle finger, so I was making the peace sign. 2, my mom she's my mom. My 4th finger. 3, was there a number 3? What about your dad, he asked. What about him? He isn't around, right? I stared at the black screen. Two guys with brooms and dustpans ambled into the theater. One of them shouted, "Movie's over, guys." "Yeah, movie's over," said the other. "You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." The boyfriend got up first and dropped a $20 bill on the floor, his way of refusing my payment for the movie tickets. I picked it up without a word because I'd already stuffed a $20 bill in his gym bag when he went to the washroom, anticipating this move. I met the boyfriend at Rochelle's 18th birthday. The party started at 7, and my mother was going to pick me up at 10, even though no one else would even show up until at least 8:30. When I got to Rochelle's, her mother, Miss B, was still bustling around the kitchen, cooking what smelled like jerk chicken, and Rochelle was hanging up streamers in the basement, standing on top of the ripped leather couch to reach the ceiling. She wasn't even dressed yet, wearing gray lounge shorts and a tattered shirt with the Jamaican flag splayed across the chest. "Hold the other side, no," she said. I climbed onto the sofa and balanced myself on the frame, taping the other end of the streamer against the wall. Rochelle suddenly got irritated. "Hey, are you going to help set up the stereo or just stare at my friend's botsy all day?" "Damn, Shell, why you got to be like that?" I hadn't noticed there was someone else in the basement with us. The boyfriend was crouched in a corner by the entrance, bent in front of the large speaker. I glanced away as soon as I spotted him. I couldn't stare at cute boys too long. "That's just my Brampton cousin," Rochelle told me. "He's a Star Wars geek." "Shell." "Oh." I stepped off the couch and followed Rochelle back upstairs. I like Lord of the Rings better. At 8 o'clock, another 3 people showed up. A guy in a do-rag and 2 girls in jersey dresses, one of them sporting the Lakers and the other one the Sixers. Anita, Shani, and Jordan probably wouldn't come until my mom picked me up at 10. They always tried to be the latest ones to anything. We stayed upstairs. There weren't enough people for the basement to become the place to be at. Rochelle and the other girls skipped to their bedroom to find something to wear, and I sat down in the living room since I wouldn't be of any help. I'd come in basics, blue jeans and a fitted camouflage shirt. I never spent more than 10 minutes deciding what to wear. Miss B had finished most of the cooking, and the dining table was crowded with aluminum trays stuffed with rice and peas, jerk chicken, potato salad, curry goat. We weren't supposed to start eating until at least another 10 people showed up. But the boyfriend crept around the kitchen and snatched a couple of fried dumplings from a pan on the stove, keeping a lookout for Miss B, who'd gone to the bathroom. He handed me a dumpling as he sat down next to me on the floral living room sofa. Durag watched us from the armchair. "Wow, you couldn't get me any?" "I only got 2 hands, don't I?" "Oh, I see," said grinning. "This is one of your moves, right? Being all chivalrous and shit." "Whatever." I stared at the dumpling. "Thanks. The truth is, I don't like fried dumplings. I prefer them boiled and mixed in stew with yams and chicken, a preference that everyone tells me is weird." "You're wrong, said the boyfriend, "about Star Wars." "You heard that?" He grinned. "Yeah, I heard that." The house started getting packed around 8:45, and there was an unspoken system to the party. Take your shoes off at the door, pack your paper plate with food, thank Miss B, and then beeline to the basement where the music was, where the dance floor was, where Rochelle was. Even downstairs, I sat on the tattered couch and watched the party ebb and flow in front of me. Rochelle danced in the center of the basement, the gold belly chain circled around her midriff, glinting in the dark and hypnotizing the guys posted up against the wall. The boyfriend found me and sat next to me again. Even though when he sat next to me upstairs, we just talked about movies. Even though for each group of girls that passed by us, one of them would ask to dance. "Look, I don't dance," I said. "So if you want to try to catch a bubble or something, feel free to talk to one of those girls." "Don't worry, love," he said. "I don't dance either." It was a lie, a corny one, and it almost made me smile. The next day, Rochelle messaged me to tell me he'd asked for my number and she'd given it to him. "He likes you. Deal with it." I think I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zalika. For an amazing reading, both of you. I wanted to just start off by noting that tonight is an early incarnation of the Active Voice series run by the Literary Festival Words, and which will be up and running with more speakers next in the winter term after the break in December. This is a series that Ivan innovated in as the Alice Munro Chair in Creativity. So I want to put out a shout out about that and to remind people to take part in that when it happens. But I also wanted to start by asking both of you about your roles this year at Western and what those involve.
Zalika, you want to go first?
Sure. So as the writer in residence, I have office hours from 2 to 5 on Thursdays, and I read people's work, whoever submits to me, and we have conversation about what they go through, or like what I ask people to send me questions, so I know exactly what to focus on when we have these conversations. But it doesn't stay to that either. Like we sometimes just end up talking about books that inspire us or movies that inspire us, and what it's like to get published, and it goes everywhere. So basically, I like to look at it as just kind of time for the writer who comes to me, and whatever they want to talk about, that obviously, sticks within pounds and everything like that, we talk about. So, but it does involve a piece of work. People are usually working on something that they want to submit, and questions, and working on, character and craft, and, sentence and structure and stuff like that. So that's my position. And sometimes I go to different classes to read and talk about kind of the same things as well.
Zalika's office is just down the hall and around the corner and across the hall from my office. And I'm the Alice Munro Chair in Creativity, which is a huge honor. And I started, I think, July 1st, 2020. So right smack in the middle of writing Care of, and right smack in the middle of that weird summer pandemic situation. And right when the money I had saved up before the pandemic was starting to run out. And so I'm very fortunate to have this job. And I teach in the fall in the fall semester. I am teaching a creative writing workshop class, and in the spring semester I teach a class called Active Voice, which is how the performance series that Josh helps me out with, that I kind of started last January 2021. So it was a live performance class that I had sort of conceived of, and thought about teaching, sort of not thinking about that we would be totally online. So how do you teach live performance online? And so I thought about how I've taught, how I've learned performance, which was largely by doing and by watching other great performers. So I just started making phone calls, and I called up John K. Sampson from the Weaker Thans, Christine Fellows, singer-songwriter, Richard Van Camp, beloved storyteller, a friend of mine, a fantastic person and writer of all genres, who I also met the very same weekend in Winnipeg that I first met Lee Miracle. And who else do we have? Veda Hilly. She did a co-produced thing in Vancouver, and we closed off with Shri Dimaline, which was a fantastic way to close, reading from her new, as of yet unpublished at the time, sequel to the Marrow Thieves, Hunting by Stars, I think it's called, Hunting by Stars. And yeah, so we basically I'm just playing and having fun. And then I learned a lot about like online creative arts production. So I've been building a digital creativity lab, like a live stream lab in the visual arts building that we just tested yesterday. So I put on my techie hat. Yeah, so I'm just playing around and teaching, writing, and learning stuff and writing like that. So, and the gig was supposed to end for me in June of 2022, and it's been extended. They asked me to stay for an extra year, so June of 2023. So I'm going to stick around, and which is great because I get to see my couple of my visions of projects to do on campus out a little bit more, make sure they're up on their little spindly legs before it's been great. Manina was my chair last year, so at the English department, and she's on sabbatical now, so it's nice to see her. Yeah.
Maybe we get to see each other in person sometime.
Yeah, I know. I worked with Josh for like what 8 months before I ever met the guy in real life. You know, he saved my bacon so many times, and we did such a good job of working together on that. We got some big crowds out and stuff, and I just met him in person in September. It was weird. Yeah. So no, I dropped him off a gift. That's not true. I dropped him off a gift in May, I believe. So I met him once in May. He's shorter than you think. He gets a lot done, right? So I had this image. I don't know what I was thinking, but yeah.
Thanks. I'll remind people that if they have questions, to post them in the Q&A function, the button at the bottom of your screen. And maybe I'll go to one of the questions. It's a question from Ellen Little, who asks, to Ivan, can you talk about using letters as the vehicle to tell stories? I'm just in the throes of culling decades of letters and feel so bad that so few letters get written these days.
Well, I guess I have to start off with props to my grandmother, Patricia Rita Cumming Senior. My paternal grandmother, she was a big letter writer. She encouraged me to write letters. She was I had your gig. You might not know this, Zalika. I was a writer in residence at Western in 2012, I think it was 2012. Yeah, one of my favorite letters I got from her was in my office at UC. So we exchanged letters from when I first moved out when I was 16 up until she passed away in 2017. And she was a huge letter writer. So she revered the letter. She loved a person who wrote letters. She loved a person who wrote good letters. So that's, I guess, where that tradition started for me. And I guess from touring so much, I get so much mail, and I try to answer them back unless it's like creepy or inappropriate or you know. But for most people, I at least respond saying thank you. But the thing is that the more you get more letters when you're doing more gigs, Zalika, you probably know this. You get more mail when you're out there. So the busier you are, the more mail you're going to get, and so usually I give them just a small, like a short response, thank you. And if there's a question, I answer it, or action item or whatever. But I've kept this file of letters forever, of special letters, and they were the ones that I thought if I ever had time, I would respond to properly. And then, the bottom fell out of my job there, being a touring performer, and I all of a sudden had this time, and I was supposed to be working on a mystery novel, and I just couldn't write about the present day. It was set in part in the past and part in the present, and I was just like, what the fuck is the present? I don't know how am I gonna, do I set it in November 2019 and just chicken out, just pretend, like, just have some weird stuff like they do on the morning show, just a couple of news items of something going on in the background, in China, but we're not really paying attention to it over in like North America or whatever. So anyway, I just started answering mail because I was having this existential crisis that we were all thrown into, and I don't like baking sourdough bread. So I was like, I better answer some mail. And it didn't even start out like a manuscript. So I don't know. Can I speak to the form of writing? No, not really. I just was answering some mail, and for me, what I did was I just read everyone's letter. Like, I almost meditated on their letter till I found what I thought the essence of the question or the conversation they were wanting to have, or what it shook loose from my own rib cage. And then I would just sit down and write. And sometimes I wrote for 11 hours a day. Like, I wrote the whole thing pretty much from April till the third week of September. All whatever, 70,000 words of it or whatever it was. And so I would not leave that letter until it was done. I would just go to sleep at like 11 o'clock and get up and just go straight back into it. And it was very meditative and weirdly connected. I felt weirdly connected, at least for those 3 or 4 days when I was working on that person's letter. Like I was just trying to imagine a little tendril going through the ether to whatever in their spirit compelled them to write me such a beautiful letter. Because some of the best writing in this book was the letter writers. I got my notes and their stuff, but some of the most beautiful stuff in here I didn't write. Anyway, I guess I hope that answers your question about letters. I love letters. Write me a letter. I might take a little years to write you back, but
Maybe I've often thought about the wonderful coincidence that you happened to be in London, Ontario, and that you got stranded in London, Ontario, in a sense because of the pandemic, and that all of that traveling, came to a halt. And yet, I'm thinking about a connection between Ivan and Zalika's writing is that you both feel so grounded in a place. And there's a question in the chat from Laura, and I hope she'll forgive me for rephrasing what she's saying, but she's so impressed, Ivan, with the fact that you remember the names of people who contact you, and that I remember in reading each of the letters that you say, well, I remember where we were that night and what the room looked like and where you sat and what you were wearing and all of those conditions. And it's so grounded in a place and time. And then I think about reading Zalika's stories and how grounded they are in a place and time. And in fact, maybe grounded, but also I often have thought that you could sort of plot your stories out on a map of Toronto. And, the movement on the subway and the neighborhoods in Toronto and the, fast food restaurants where stories take place. And then in the background of all of that, there's Jamaica, the sort of the place where some of your central character's family come from. So I wonder if maybe this is a very roundabout question, just about talking about being grounded and positioning your writing in a place. Maybe Zalika, you can start it off.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. Place is always an interesting thing for me to talk about because when I had originally started my collection, or wrote the most of it, I should say, I was at Columbia, so I was in New York, and I had thought that I was going to have an American publisher, or I thought I was going to have like a UK publisher. I didn't really think about a Canadian publisher because I did my schooling in the States. And then after I finished, I went to the UK. And I also was very afraid of place. I was very afraid of putting it in the neighborhood of Little Jamaica because I didn't want to come across like I was trying to speak for an entire community. And so I had written it as this kind of like amorphous place. And like one of my mentors was like, where is this? I have absolutely no idea where this is. Like I need to be grounded in something. And I kind of pushed back against it because I was like, there are a lot of books where you don't really know where the place is. And I don't really want to do that. But every time I kept coming back home to Toronto, things were changing. Little Jamaica was already starting to be gentrified. That has started when I was living there. So I don't want to say I made peace with it, but that was happening and it had been years. So I was like, okay, there's really nothing. Yeah, that's just happening. But when I was in school, there are other things that were going, like Honest Ed's was going, and the world's biggest bookstore was going, and the Toronto that I grew up with, because I grew up all around Toronto, was just becoming replaced with condos. And I also had a lot of the friends that I grew up with didn't grow up in the same places, or a lot of the friends that I had in school didn't grow up in the same places that I did. So they didn't live downtown and didn't really have such a connection to the world's biggest bookstore know that Eaton Center, there was like a police station there when in like the 90s, and they didn't know that Yorkdale had like PJ's Pet Store and everything like that. So basically I felt like no one around me knew the Toronto that I knew. And so I kind of just put it in the book where I was just like, I really want to commemorate what the like 90s to early 2000s Toronto was like. And then once I did that, place just became such a character. And I got really, really into it because I was just like, I'm absolutely going to make this a Toronto story. I don't know why I didn't think I would when the whole, sort of reason for Frying Plantain, even though it came very organically, was that I didn't see myself represented in books. If I saw Black characters in books, they were African American. They weren't, girls who are Jamaican, Caribbean in Toronto. So why wouldn't I put Toronto in the book? And so then it just became this whole process of making sure that the city came alive and that people who knew, and people who didn't would be transported into these streets and these places and these neighborhoods. And so I'm really glad when I hear that the place is very grounded, because I worked really hard to make sure that happened.
Yeah, Zalika, it's actually one of the things I love about your book is that I don't know Toronto super well, but I know some of those neighborhoods enough to like be able to put myself on the street, and that was one of the things I really liked and really responded to, probably because place is always a character for me, because I mean, I'll only speak for me, maybe it's not the same for everyone, but I was born and raised in the North, so it doesn't really matter to, as my dad would say, 30 below is 30 below is 30 below. And 30 below doesn't really care like how smart you think you are or how much money you have or, blah, blah, blah. Put your fucking scarf on and your mitts and don't let me tell you again. And so it doesn't, the Yukon always reminds you that you are where you are, because you get up in the morning in January and it's dark and it's dark again by 2:30 in the afternoon, and your tires are frozen square and your truck won't start because you didn't plug it in. And and if you if you run out of gas and you have to walk down the highway, you're going to get frostbite in 3 minutes. And so it was, I guess the place was, it's a strong enough character that it always grounded me in where I was. And I'm just a noticer, like Manina made reference to. There's one letter I got from a kid, and Leslie, the young trans kid from California, and he said, "Oh, you probably don't remember me, but my mom drove me for 3 hours." And the thing is that a lot of people say that you probably don't remember me, but if they made a connection with me, chances are it was a mutual thing. And of course I remember that kid. His mom drove him for 3 hours. So I was like, yeah, I remember you. We changed his name in the book, but I remember you, Leslie. Like, yeah, you had a short sleeve button down. It was plaid. I remember it had yellow in it, maybe I think blue. And we were standing on that ugly carpet in the lobby of the hotel or the theater. And he wrote me back and he had a picture. His mom had taken a picture of us that night, and he was in that, but it's not like I remembered it. It was like all those details were up in the ether. And when I was in the story thinking about it, I just reached up and grabbed them. Like it's not like a memory. It was like more like a memory bank. And I just went and took out that book or something. I don't know, or memory library. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but I don't know. I think it has to do with being a noticer. And I think a lot of the kind of writers that I like and respond to are noticers. Like those little things that place you so much in the story. That's data that I'm always kind of attuned to or something. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but Yeah, I always really love because there were for years. This is a Canadian thing too, right? Because for years you had to set. They would be like, "Oh, you can't set a mystery novel in Vancouver. Set it in Seattle." Even if it was a Canadian publisher, because then you can sell it to Americans, because Americans won't care about Vancouver, but they'll care about Seattle, and they won't be able to blah blah. And now we have enough of a sort of literary identity, I guess, that we don't have to fake it anymore about where we're from into something that's supposedly more interesting. Like I don't know, it could be a commentary on the whole. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? Like we don't have to do that anymore. Like set it in some place more interesting, you know? How offensive is that? You know, like, oh, we can't be writing about being in New York. Or Toronto. We better make it in New York because that's an exciting city. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I love that now that we've come that far that we're not expected to cross the border in our minds.
I have a question in the chat for Zalika from Alicia. I'm sure it's really generative to be mentoring writers after what for some of us has been a really isolating time, but also a time that has brought out such creativity. And this actually could be a question for other people. Can you give an example of how mentoring other writers has given you new insight or a new creative path?
I think for me, it's just seeing how it sounds weird. It's just seeing how the mind works, like just seeing what I wouldn't think of putting these two words together. That's a really interesting way of doing that. Interesting. And then talking to someone and their thought process. I mean, my thought process isn't going to change, but I think that, you know, there's a lot of talk about writing being a very solitary act, and it is. But I also think community of writers is important because you can feed off of each other and learn from each other in what they say and what they put down and what perspective they get into. And so like there was a particular writer who wrote something about like a fascist regime, and I was like thinking, oh, what if their influences. I also think in terms of like movies. So I was just kind of like, oh yeah, this kind of reminds me of like the death of Stalin. Like I'm kind of getting that vibe from this. And then, you know, they mentioned a different movie, which I can't remember right now, but I was like, I would never have thought that would inspire you. That makes absolute sense. And so just seeing where other people come from makes me think of different ways that my writing can come from. And like, I don't have to like, it makes me think more broadly in terms of like what can inspire and what can be put down on the page. And so that's like the benefit of talking to other writers, whether or not I'm in a mentoring capacity. I just like hearing what other writers have to say and how they use like commas or semicolons and dashes and things like that. Like there was an entire debate that I accidentally started one time at Banff between like fiction writers and poets about when to use semicolons. And it was just because I kept using semicolons. And the person who was mentoring me was like, you shouldn't use semicolons unless it's an academic essay. And then the whole table erupted into like a very healthy, like 2-hour debate about semicolons. And I think that's fantastic. So just stuff like that definitely just makes me it gets my like creative engine going.
I bet you've been talking to a lot of young writers in your position, I imagine.
Yeah. I really like that project, and I guess I don't see it in terms of like mentor and mentee or teacher and student. I do what I can do in my classroom. Like, of course, there's the power dynamic. I'm the one who's grading them, and I'm the one who's getting paid to be there or in there. You know what I mean? Like those things aren't. You have to acknowledge those things, but then acknowledge them and then do what you can to dismantle them is my approach. I guess, to teaching and I'm not an academic, and I didn't come from that background, and I've never I'm an autodidact, and I learned from reading and from like hanging out with other writers and stuff. And so I guess I come from a different sort of like I come by it on a different path. And um I just wanted the thing that got me really stoked about teaching yesterday was I got home from a pretty long day on campus, and there was like an email from one of my students, and she was all like, I know it's kind of last minute, but I got asked last minute to like write this poem for Remembrance Day, but it's not like super pro military and I'm all worried about it. And would you mind like, and I just jumped on a Zoom call with her and she read me this poem and it was so good. And, you know, she's a fourth year, so she's like maybe early 20s. And I was like, you're gonna just kill it. You're just gonna get up to her tomorrow in front of all those people. And then I was like, but you better write me back and tell me how it goes. Like, because I'm not dragging my ass to campus again tomorrow. It's been every day this week, but I need to know how it goes. And don't be leaving me hanging. Like, if I don't, you know, I better get a email from you. And she did. She killed it. And like, and she was also like, and look, I put all my words on one page and I made it this and I did that and I'm gonna do this. And she was like parroting me back to me, like not parroting, but like telling me back some of the performance tricks I've been. And I was like, I taught her something, and she's gonna go out there and use what I taught her that I learned from other writers, and she's gonna like kill it tomorrow in front of all those people, and she's gonna be super inspired. And isn't that what it's all about? Like, isn't that what teaching's supposed to be about? Right? And it's so I guess I see it as a kind of a reciprocal thing somehow. I don't know, not to sound like a hippie because I'm not, but yeah.
I have a question for Ivan from the chat, and it's from Andrea, who says, I'm both gripped and touched by the part of your stories where you write about complicated and difficult relationship with family members. I'm a 60s scoop survivor in the process of writing about my experiences in the white family I grew up in, with the hope of contributing to the conversation about this harmful colonial practice. Can you please speak to the challenge of balancing writing about the truth of our experience and being compassionate toward the people who have hurt us?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that's a super important story that we need more versions and narratives from. So I encourage you with every bit of me to continue with that work. And you know, I've been, since Care of came out, I've been asked a lot about my relationship with my father, which is, I think, one of the more complicated relationships I write about in that book. And I guess what I tell my students is like, you have to find the in-between space in there, and you have to place yourself right in there. And it's cathartic and dangerous at the same time. But the more care that you and attention you pay to having compassion for the so-called bad guy in that story, the stronger the writing will be. And in some ways, the more cathartic the writing process will be. I'll speak only for myself. Yeah, this is, again, I'll get choked up thinking about it. Lee Miracle was so good at this, you know? I guess what I'm interested in right now is long conversations, like nuanced conversations, difficult conversations, and figuring out how to prepare myself in the best way to walk into to sit down at a fraught table with a difficult person or someone that you have a complicated history with. And like, my friend Esper Bergman, great writer, says, be willing to go 51%. So 1% across the line of sharing the burden of whatever journey that conversation is going to ask you both to embark upon, and the business of active repair. I think we need to really investigate that right now. That we're being asked to be a part of so many different hard conversations. Like, we're trying to reckon Canada, this settler state that's always branded ourselves as like maple syrup supping nice guys. And that's just not the story. And it's anyone who's ever been on the wrong end of Canada knows that that's not the story. And so I guess you have to be able to. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense at all. This is a conversation that we could have literally for days and days, because it's so hard. But I guess like being able to really I really had to dig deep. I'll say this. I had to dig deep to find the compassion to write about my relationship with my dad in a way that honored him wholly as a three-dimensional person and acknowledged like the potential, at least, for how much of the damage that I feel that relationship has done me comes and stems from his own trauma, I guess. And not every bad character in your life is going to warrant, or will you be ready to treat with that kind of compassion? So you have to decide as the writer whether you're ready to go there and then go there. But if you're not ready for whatever reason, and you might never be ready, then make your peace with that, I guess.
Thank you. Zalika, maybe I'll ask a question of you that spins off of that in a different direction, because you're writing fiction. So you're more than one remove from what you're writing about. But in Frying Plantain, you write about a family that is very fraught. And your central character observes them. And we can tell that a lot goes unsaid. And there are a lot of harsh words. But underneath that, there is a level of understanding. And I wonder if you could just talk about the ways in which you can capture a family dynamic that is so complex and so filled with tension. And on top of everything else, we're viewing these interactions from the point of view of a developing young woman who is sitting on the sidelines, but is really at the center of the family struggles. And that's a really delicate balance to achieve. Can you maybe talk about writing about family tensions?
Sure. It's interesting because I don't think I really thought about it as writing family tensions. I think I just thought of it as writing family, and how everyone has these kinds of tensions and things unsaid. And it wasn't really like it. It's funny because, people talk about process and talk about writing, and I don't want to make it seem like, oh yeah, it kind of just came out of me. Of course, there was a lot of intention and editing and everything like that. But I think when I had first started writing, I was very concerned about theme. I would just be like, this is the theme of my story, and I'm going to write to theme. And then everything was very clunky and wooden because I had the theme in mind, until finally, I had an instructor who was just like, the theme's going to come out. You don't have to think about that. You're going to write and it's just going to come out. And I really took that to heart. So when it came to family dynamics, I just knew that I wanted to write a very nuanced, three-dimensional family. I didn't want them to be caricatures. I didn't want them to be one-dimensional. So that's kind of the only thing that I had in mind when I started writing the dynamics, because that's the most important thing. And certain things, just like, food plays a very big role in the book, and it's because that's the way these characters show love. It's also the way that they break bad news to kind of like ease the sting of it. It's just like, well, your belly is full and you're eating this really like $20 burger that I can't really afford, so you can't really be mad that I'm telling you this thing. And those kinds of things just I was just, it just kind of came out until finally someone in like workshop was like, do you realize that every time there's like a moment of levity in your book, there's like food involved? And I was like, oh, and then I became more intentional with that. And so that's how that kind of worked, where someone would point out, this is a thing that you're doing. And I'd be like, I did not know that I would do that. Okay, now that I know, I'm going to be more intentional about it. And so I think the only thing that I was very conscious of was the grandfather, and how it would be like to, create this character that causes a lot of the tensions in the family, but has this kind of unspoken cosmic connection with the main character and how she would feel about that. Because I was just like, that'd be really interesting if, this character, she kind of like resents him, but understands him at the same time, and how fun that would be. And so, yeah, I guess I'm not really answering that question, because I think I kind of just like wrote it like it's a family and families are like this. And so like there are times when I would say like dysfunctional family, but I don't mean that the family specifically is dysfunctional. I'm just meaning like families are dysfunctional, way families are dysfunctional. And so that's kind of how I looked at it. And I also was very aware that Kara was a character who doesn't see everything. So, she sees Verna, her grandmother, in a certain way, but, that's when description comes into like how carefully she takes care of her house and why she's so like, and like why she's taking care of her house so carefully. And that's also like, I love dialogue's like my favorite thing to write. And so I have a scene in the first story, Pighead, where the mother is asked if she's a nanny, and Kara doesn't understand why, but the fact that that's in there, I was like, well, that's going to be enough for the reader to understand maybe why Eloise can be so short all the time. She's a young single mother whose kid is in a predominantly white school, and people think that she's not picking up her own kid, that she couldn't possibly be picking up her own kid. And so, I think a lot of it too is I just leave it up to the reader to make these connections and trust the reader that they'll understand the different nuances and the different, resentments and loves and tensions and, bonding that happens in families.
Thank you. You absolutely are answering the question. And it feels like food becomes another kind of language. And can I just indulge me while I point out one of the most touching moments in the stories for me was when Kara's mother is packing food into old margarine containers, and she's not speaking. Sorry, Kara's grandmother is packing the food, and she's not speaking to Kara's mother, but she says, you take this home and share it with your mother. You're going to share it, aren't you? And I thought, you're not even saying a hello to this woman, but you're still sending food home for her. And it's such an eloquent way of speaking those kind of unspoken conversations. Ivan, did you want to add to that?
Oh, I'm just grooving on margarine containers with leftovers in them. Yeah.
Yep.
It's like, I think one time my grandma sent me home with some leftovers, and I got it home and it was actually margarine. She grabbed the wrong thing, and she had no margarine at home, and but she had like some leftover pieces of roast and gravy and like 2 roasted potatoes and some peas. Yeah.
That actually reminds me one time, because there's like all these different memes and stuff on social media where it's like the tin of cookies and you open up and it's like knitting things and like thread and stuff. One time I actually opened the tin and it was cookies and I didn't know what to do with that because I was like, it's never cookies. Do I eat one? Like, I don't understand. So yeah, it was just like,
I was just looking for a needle and thread.
Yeah, I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yep.
There's a question in the chat for Ivan about, given all your work with schools, have you ever considered writing a YA book or a graphic novel?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, but I don't know that they'll necessarily like. This is what I've realized about YA fiction is that all books are meant for anyone who wants to read them of any age. That's my rule of books. YA books are not for young adults. They're for the parents of young adults to think that their kids are reading the right thing. That's what they are. So yes, that said, when I did One in Every Crowd, that was like that was from school. That was a YA collection of previously like stories from other books. And that was the librarians being like, hey, I'm in Alberta. Help me out. I need something to give all these trans kids and non-binary kids and queer kids are coming up. And like, so could you just do something that has no like weed? That's before it was legalized. No weed, no like anal sex. And what was the other thing? Maybe day drinking. I can't remember. Anyways, I had to clean it up for the youth, but not for the youth. They're reading whatever they want to read, and then if it's not in the library, they're finding it online. So it was mostly just to sneak some content past the parents, right? Yeah. So I guess the answer to your question is yes, and yes, I'm working on both.
That makes me think. I have a question from the Q&A. About getting published and how difficult it is. And maybe I can use that to leverage a question about what you're working on now. Zalika, you want to head off with that? I know you have a book in the pipeline now.
Yes, it's based on Jamaican mythology, which just comes from West African mythology. There's a figure called River Mama, and depending on who you speak to, there are many River Mamas, or there's one River Mama, and she's a water deity, kind of like a mermaid, and she has a golden comb that she combs her hair with, and if she leaves it on a rock before she like dives into the water, and you take it. There are many different versions. You take the comb and then she comes to you in dreams and you return the comb and you'll get treasure, or she pretends to give you treasure and she actually kills you. There's many different stories that says either there's a bridge in Jamaica, a flat bridge, and she can either save, because there's a lot of accidents that happen on the bridge, and she can either, like some say that she causes the accident, some say that she saves the people. So it's like she's basically, a divisive figure. And there's this poem by Lorna Goodison that says the River Mama wants out. And it's basically a poem talking about how in contemporary Jamaica, the spirituality and traditional medicine and traditional, like this tradition in general, is slowly being left behind. And so River Mama doesn't want to stay in the waters anymore. She wants to go. She wants to become like an Instagram star. She wants to meet P. Diddy. And there's a line that says she wants to discover snow for the first time. And that really stuck with me. And so I have the story where she goes to Toronto to see snow for the first time, and she meets my character. And she said that a tourist had taken her comb and she wants the comb back. And she leaves it up to my character and her co-workers, who kind of get wrapped up in it to find this comb by the end of the day. And she goes through Toronto and has to deal with different obstacles, whether it's the TTC, because the TTC fucking sucks, or if it's like, duppies, which are, ghosts in Jamaican folklore as well. And it's also about, because my character is like 25, so she's going through like a quarter life crisis, and she's not working where she wants to work, and she is in a very dark place. And then it also talks kind of a bit about the gentrification and appropriation of Jamaican cuisine in Toronto, which was happening a lot around 2017. So yeah, just a whole bunch of different stuff. That's what I'm working on.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. Ivan?
I'm working on so again, right around when I got the gig at Western, I also signed a 2-book deal with McClellan and Stewart with Jared Bland. And so I'm working on book 2. Book 1 was Care Of. Book 2 is the book I was supposed to be working on when the pandemic hit. So it's sort of a mystery, although it's really, it's called mycelium. I don't know if you know what they are. They're the little tendrils that connect, underground tendrils that connect fungi in the forest. They transmit a lot of, they magically transmit a lot of information. So, and I called it that because it's a mystery, but the mystery is solved by understanding how information is passed along or not, or changed or not in small towns. And it's based on, inspired by a real thing, a couple of real things that happened to me when I was a kid. But one of the main sort of catalysts is my neighbor disappeared in Whitehorse when I was 17. He lived 2 doors down from me, John Moffat. He disappeared. He went to the bar one night, dropped some acid, and was drinking draft beer and listening to a bad cover band, got up to use the bathroom, and nobody ever saw him again. And at the end of the night, his keys were there, his parka was there, his car was in the parking lot, and he was never to be seen alive again. They found his remains 9 years later on the other side of the river, in what may or may not have been a shallow grave. And the mystery of his death has never been solved. And I've always known I was going to write about it, but it's changing a lot. So yeah, I'm working on that mycelium, and it's going pretty good. Yeah, it's set in the Yukon. It's set on my street. Speaking of place, it's like so I feel like driving over to my uncle's house, taking my regular route that I used to ride my bike on when I was going to babysit when I was like in 1983 or whatever, when I was 14. I'm just doing research for my novel. Yeah, I gotta go see my cousin up at our Cal trailer park doing research for my novel. And so it's great to have the Yukon be such a big character again for me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Having a good time.
So you've both really switched genres for the newest works. I'm looking forward to those. I have one question from the chat for Ivan, who is very grateful that you read the letter from Melinda and your response to her. Could you speak more to the importance of sharing the message that we don't have to be trapped within gender prisons? And if you know any, she would love to find more Canadian authors or creators whose work revolves around similar topics. Oops, muted.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question?
The question is about the importance of avoiding being trapped in gender prisons and getting that message out.
I'm not, well, down with gender prisons, that's what I say. And it's where I situate myself when I have those conversations, is that I think that gender prisons are they're not just populated by trans people or non-binary people or gender non-conforming people. I've always thought that my dad, part of his damage is like he's trapped in an ideal of masculinity that isn't functional and doesn't work. And I guess we think of toxic masculinity as being toxic to the rest of us, and sometimes forget that that most poison, what do they say? poison it does more damage to the vehicle in which it is stored, or the vessel in which it is stored, than on the item on which it is poured, or something like that. So I guess that's, and in terms of like reading lists, there's lots of great stuff out there, and I'd rather hear Zalika answer a question than answer a question that Google can answer. And I mean that like with no disrespect, and quite lovingly and compassionately. But, I'll pass on that part of the question and give some space to my my comrade here.
Well, then maybe I will ask a question to Zalika about the short story cycle and Flying Plantain. And how you figure out how to put the bits and pieces together when you're working with almost glimpses into moments in a person's life, rather than trying to create a connected, super cohesive narrative. Although I think you could read that volume both ways. I think it works as a whole, but it also works with the individual pieces.
Sure. And I just want to say thank you, Evan. You're a very gracious, you're a very gracious person to do an event with. Yeah, when I was writing Frying Plantain, I didn't know I was writing a short story collection. I thought I was writing a novel. I wrote the titular story, Frying Plantain, and I handed it in, and I said, "This is my first chapter." And my instructor was like, "You didn't write a chapter, you wrote a story." And I said, "Oh, okay. So then I'll just write a chapter next time." And then I wrote Pighead. And then he was like, "Yeah, dude, you just keep writing stories." And so I was just like, I guess I don't really know how to write a chapter. And that's how it became a short story collection, where I just wrote what came natural to me. And they were these glimpses in time. And I moved on, even if it was chronological. It was still these kinds of, snapshots. And then speaking of, getting published, one thing that it took me about like 2-3 years to get an agent, because one thing you hear a lot is that short stories don't make money. So nobody wants to represent them. And nobody wants to publish them because nobody wants to read them. And so the constant question was like, can you turn these into, like, make this a novel, like have the different linkages? And I realized I didn't want the linkages. I didn't want to show where Kara and Eloise were between these times. I didn't want to show like that they were moving in this. And I just wanted the reader to be in the moment with the story, and then move on and become into this other moment. And then altogether, it can become a whole. It didn't really become a whole until I put Frying Plantain away for about 2 years because nobody wanted to publish it. And I was very down, and I thought I was never going to like see the light of day. And it turned out that those 2 years were what I needed, because it was so close to the family that Kara didn't really have an identity outside of it. And so stories like Lovely and stories like Drunk, where she's, out with her friends, and you see the influence of her family, but she's not necessarily interacting with them all the time. That's what came from it. And so that's when it kind of became an actual arc of growing up and what it means to grow up for this particular character. And that's kind of how that happened.
Thank you. My eye just glanced down to my clock on the computer, and I'm shocked to find we're at 8:29. So I'll have to wrap this up. Let me express my warmest thanks to Zalika and Ivan for joining us tonight and sharing so much, such an entertaining reading and so much wisdom, and sharing your thoughts. I also want to thank Josh Lambier, who is the mastermind behind the Words Fest events, and who is overseeing all of the bits and pieces to make them work together. Also, the evening was funded by the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Western, and we want to give our thanks to them as well. And thank you both for coming, and thank you all of the people out there in the audience. Though we can't see your faces, we imagine you listening. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Zalika, Manina, and Josh. And thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Thank
I'm going to
you.
go eat some dinner. Zalika, hope to see you. Yeah.
Yes,
We'll see
absolutely.
each other in the halls. It's going to be
For
good.
sure.
Yep.
All right.
All right.